Thank you so much for coming today. I am Regina Cortina, and, um, and I would like to tell you a little bit why I organized this panel. And it's called A Conversation on Education Across the Americas. And this panel is part of the university-wide celebration of 50 years of Latin American studies at Columbia University. One of the questions that we are most often asked at the program level is what I will do when I finish at Teachers College. Last semester, one of our faculty members did a small survey in his class about what the students liked the most about our program. The response was the students. So I decided that the best way for us to celebrate 50 years of Latin American studies at Columbia was to organize this panel and to invite exceptional Teachers College alumni from the International and Comparative Education Program to share insight on their active engagement with research and policy work in various aspects of education throughout the Americas. So before introducing the panelists, I would like to thank the sponsors of today's event. First of all, the Institute of Latin American Studies at Columbia University, the Columbia University Global Centers, and the Office of Alumni Relations at Teachers College. I asked my two colleagues, Leslie Bartlett and Joanne Clifton, to help me introduce the panelists, and we're going to go following the order in the program. So I will ask Leslie to come on to introduce Ryan.
I wanted to briefly then introduce Ryan Burgess. It was my pleasure to serve as dissertation advisor for Ryan. He did amazing research in Columbia on education and risk and resilience factors, education as risk and resilience factor among children and youth in Columbia. So after finishing, he did a master's degree here and then completed his doctorate here. After completing that, Ryan did some consulting work and research work with UNICEF for a while before joining the Inter-American Development Bank, where he worked in the education portfolio in Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname for a while before moving then to Panama, where he's now overseeing the bank's education portfolio.
That's obviously an extremely general title, but as I was thinking about what I should talk about today, I ended up with a presentation that would have had me here speaking for a couple of hours, probably by myself by the end of that. So I decided to focus on a few areas. One, as Leslie mentioned, I now work with the Inter-American Development Bank in the office in Panama. And just to give you an idea as to what the Inter-American Development Bank, or the IDB, is, I wanted to very briefly mention a couple of these key points. One is that the education falls within the social sector, which has 4 different areas. And down below is the scope of work in terms of the operations and the different programs and grants that the IDB offers to primarily the governments in the region. And when I think about my work, I can break it down into 3 broad areas. The first one is related to the operational or programmatic side, which is the largest part of the bank's work directly with the governments. And that's primarily loans ranging from $10 million up to hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the country and what the needs are. And there you can see some of the types of initiatives that are included in those programs. Secondly, we also have what we call technical cooperations, which are grants. And the primary implementer of some of the grants is also the government, with focusing on their priorities, what are they interested in, what do they want to learn more about, so that they can then move forward in that area, whether it's a pilot project that will then be nationalized, or to learn or understand certain issues that they're focusing on. And the third is research and evaluation, which could be an idea that I think it's a great idea to pursue, and then try and focus on that based on the research and the evidence that I'm finding on when I talk to the counterparts, other stakeholders, the results of other studies. Then that's something, another line, and that would be implemented by the bank instead of our clients. And I'm going to focus in very general terms in terms of what I see in terms of some of the issues in Latin America. In the work that I've been doing with the IDB in the last just over 4 years, has me thinking a lot about these issues. And one is in terms of the achievements, primary education is now over 90% in many of these countries, practically 100%. So access in primary school is not the main issue anymore. Completion of primary rates has also increased. It's not 100%, but it's definitely much better than it was a couple of decades ago. And you also have more students entering secondary education. When we start to get into the quality side, or what exactly are the students learning, then that's where we start to see a lot more of the challenges. And that's what we'll see at the bottom half of the graph in terms of the issues, whether it's the level of repetition rates is very high in first grade, especially in the transition periods. First grades, 7th grade, 10th grade, have very high repetition rates in schools, so low internal efficiency within the system. The quality of teachers is also an area that we're trying to address, as well as the relevance of the curriculum. We have high rates of students dropping out, especially at the secondary level. It ties into institutional capacity as well, but the point that I will focus on a little later is going to be the last one, which is related to the increased levels of conflict and violence in the region and the issues related to youth at risk, which, as Leslie mentioned, is an area that I have been interested in for quite a while and focused my dissertation and my research while at UC in that area. A couple of the points mentioned. Infrastructure still needs help. In the bank, we talk a lot about trying to get away from working too much on infrastructure and focusing a lot more on curriculum development, teacher training, capacity building. However, there is still a need in terms of getting the basic services to the schools, ensuring that they have appropriate facilities as well. So that still remains a part of our portfolio, but it's never alone. If infrastructure is not programmed, so is something else related to the quality of education. This is an example of difficult access in Panama. That's a school that we're building now, or supporting the government to build now. That's a closer picture of it. It's a large school. If you look in the surrounding areas around the mountains, a lot of the students that would go to secondary school would go to that school because there are no other secondary schools in that particular area. It's one of the indigenous territories. And that will be done in about 6 months, or we expect to have inauguration around March of next year. So that's one large area of the projects that we have in Panama, is dealing with access, coverage, and through infrastructure. And then we're tying it also to the curriculum development, focusing on competencies, which I'll touch on in a couple minutes. This is a graph that I've seen many times in the last several years in terms of the PISA results, one of the major international exams that we have. As GDP goes up, the expectation is that the results would also go up. But this would be the average line that you would expect them to be. But the blue is primarily Latin America, which is predominantly, or all of them below the average. So that ties into the quality of what's really happening in the classroom, and what is needed to ensure that the students are learning. And this one ties into the teachers, the challenges that we have with the teachers. There was a study done in Peru where the teachers took a test in math and reading comprehension, and the level 0 on that side refers to the percentage of the teachers that did not complete the basic level in that area, which would be the area that they're teaching to the students. So the challenge in terms of content that the students are learning from the teachers are not very familiar with the content either. The trends that we've seen, or that I've seen over the last several years in terms of what are the governments asking of us in terms of funding and technical support, are several of these areas, from preschool education. One laptop per child is in many countries now, and is going to keep increasing. The one focus, there's more of a focus on secondary education now as well, and that we're going to see in the post-2015 Millennium Development Goal discussions, which there have been some groups already established to focus on secondary education in the post-2015 MDGs, and focusing more on competencies-based curriculum. Competencies-based curriculum means focusing not only on the knowledge content, but also on the process, problem-solving process, the critical thinking, the analysis that goes into the learning, getting to the final answer. And the third aspect of the competencies curriculum would be the attitude, or the social-emotional skills of the students. What kind of attitude do they have? Are they motivated? Those are the types of skills that they're trying to bring into now more explicitly into the curriculum. And that also ties into school violence prevention as well as the resilience framework. This is an initiative that in Suriname, well, preschool education. We supported the government in the last couple of years on improving the preschool curriculum, having it be a lot more engaging, a lot more active, a lot more participatory. So now the students have a lot more engaging materials. All the teachers were trained, as well as had coaching along with the one-off training. So thinking that having a lot more coaching sessions with the teachers would also have a better impact in terms of their ability of learning how to teach the curriculum to the students. So it's not Latin America, but it is an initiative that was very hard to get through. And in the end, we had a lot of positive feedback from the teachers, from the students, and seeing in the class observations, we saw many teachers being a lot more engaged with the students and having them be more active. That's one aspect that needs to be addressed to support the students before getting to the age 10 to 20 group, which is where we see now a lot of students dropping out of school. A lot of the kids are getting involved in, whether as victim or perpetrator, into the crime and violence. The levels of violence in the region have been increasing in the last 10, 12 years. And the population, the under 30 population in the region is over 60%. So the question then comes up as to what is the role of these youth in education, and how can the educational system support these youth before they get involved in risky behavior. Risky behavior is usually a result of accumulation of risks. The problem is that when poverty itself is a risk, and when you're living in poverty already, when you don't have access to some of the basic services, then that itself is considered chronic stress, which is one of the predictors that could lead youth to some of these risky behaviors that we see. And so that's one side of the issues related to youth. The other side, which is where the discussion is on both sides. One is how do you work with the resilient youth that are affected by the violence, by the conflict, and by risks. And the other part is the educational system actually offering what they should be learning? And in 2010, we conducted a survey in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile, talking to the employers. What are they looking for from those that they employ, from the young people that they employ? And the main areas that they focused on were more related to other, not technical skills, but rather the attitude, responsibility, ability to communicate well, being committed to the job, having critical thinking skills. The other technical side of what the day-to-day job would be is something that they felt they could train the employees to learn. In other words, they hire based on the attitude, and they train for the skills as they need. This is an important point that the IDB is continuing to work on now, is doing a follow-up study in the coming year, this year, to try and learn more about how to support youth. What is the role of technical and vocational education training, which in the region is the perception is that that's for those that cannot learn, quote unquote, as opposed to countries in Europe that see it as a positive alternative, where it's even in greater demand from those at the top of some of the best students want to go into those types of programs. So it's an issue of perception that can also make it difficult in Latin America. And this is going into the competencies study. I'm not going to go into this one, but basically this highlights the 6 countries that started to get into figuring out how and agreeing on how to evaluate the different competencies that students should learn through education. There were 6 out of 38 countries in the study, but they still scored below the average out of all the countries. So that it's difficult to really say what that means for Latin America. But the main point is really about how to work with youth in terms of resilience, addressing issues of conflict and violence, as well as an appropriate curriculum and approach in the learning process. That approach also includes the youth themselves. That discussion has been gaining ground the last year and a half in terms of the participation and engagement of youth in decision-making processes and policies. And those are questions that I still have as well in terms of what is the role of youth, or what should be the role of youth in these processes. How can youth be involved to support decreasing crime and violence and increasing the resilience of youth in the region? And as well as thinking about financial literacy, which we'll hear more from you on that one. But that's another point that's been coming up a lot as well in terms of having a proper technical skill for when you leave the education system. In terms of the work that I've been doing, that's basically what it amounts to. One of the questions that REGINA also asked was in terms of my background. And in thinking about how to answer that question, I thought it more of, here are the past 20 years of my life in 2 minutes. Because basically it's more of a trajectory. That kind of went all over the place in the beginning. So
What are these knives used for?
I focus, nothing related to the crime environment that I was alluding to. But I focused on some of, at least for me, what I thought were moments that made a difference in where I was headed. And I started off in international business and marketing, a double major in undergrad. And I sold knives, Cutco, some of the best cutlery.
Hey Ryan, was that before or after the violence?
That was somewhere in the middle. But with that, it made a difference because of what I learned in terms of problem solving, how to interact with others. It's a lot about psychology and interacting. What is the other person looking for? I also learned about when I go to buy something, the sales tricks that other people can be putting on me, because here the message is a no is not a no, a no is a smoke screen for something else. So what is it that's the real issue? But anyway, that's how I started off. Started working in sales, didn't like it. At that time, I didn't really know much about the international development field, especially in education. As soon as I found out, I signed up, went to get my Master's in Science International Development Education. I was in Miami. And while I was there, the 2 major points is, one, I was teaching as a substitute teacher, K through 12. But I managed to get to study and learn to do research in France and learn French and do an internship with Save the Children in Honduras. And those were 2 important moments that allowed me to do what came next, which was come back, finish my master's, now what? Again, I ended up working with the State Department in an office in Miami, and that was after applying for a job with Save the Children because the person that interviewed me sent me over there. But the key reason why I got that job was because I had a master's and I spoke Spanish. At least 2 important points. Then I got bored of that. It wasn't because I wanted education, and I looked at a fellowship at Catholic Relief Services, which I ended up getting, and that sent me to Macedonia, Armenia, and Serbia, and I started working in project management. of education initiatives in those countries in the regional project as well, which I thought was great learning experience. However, I wanted to be more technical as opposed to managerial. And that's why I left that job and came to TC to pursue the doctorate, because in order to get more technical, I needed to have the doctorate, at least for the type of work, including what I'm doing now. So, came to TC, and the important points about the experience here was about what I did while I was here. And in the master's, in the MED, I focused on curriculum and teaching. But I managed to go on the trip to Brazil, focusing on street children. I was also working with the human rights organization initiatives in Brazil and several countries in Africa, and participated and assisted the International Institute of Education on some of their conferences that they had with youth. And then finished the master's, straight to the doctorate. Took advantage of the course in Tanzania. The Human Rights Organization went bankrupt while I was in Tanzania. So, and the important point there is that I was going to go to Brazil right after that, and decided to go to Colombia instead, and turn that into my pre-field visit research to see if that's really where I wanted to go to do my dissertation. And I had a TA that year, and then I did my research and tried to get a lot of grants. And then went straight into UNICEF from here. I actually got that offered on graduation day, and went to the Jerusalem office focusing on that work. And the critical piece about there was about the networking within TC, working closely with the support that I had from my advisors as well, made a big difference. And that led me to where I am now, which is the IDB. So that's my history.
Thank you. Veronica is an assistant professor at the School of Education at the Católica University in Chile, and she obtained a master's degree in policy, politics, and leadership here, and a Ph.D. in economics of education. She focused her research today on the labor market for teachers in Chile, program evaluation, and teacher effectiveness. And she has found she's co-founder of two organizations that are helping to improve the status of education in Chile. One is Enseña Chile, that is a non-profit organization that recruits and provides support it's like Teach for America, but it's in Chile, for high school students to go to work into impoverished schools. And the other one that I think is very interesting is called Elige Educar, and it's an organization that has the mission to raise the appreciation of the teaching profession and to attract high school graduates to enter the teaching profession by enrolling in the School of Education. Thank you for coming, Veronica, from far away.
The idea of my presentation today is not so technical, but more about what I'm doing right now, and I'm trying to put together my academic part with my entrepreneurial part in the same presentation. So the idea is not to present today a Chilean educational class about the educational context, but I thought it was important for you to know what was the motivation of my work. So as Ryan said, it's more or less the same. In Chile, there's a sustained increase in educational coverage at all levels and for all socioeconomic background. This graph basically shows the coverage for secondary education for different quintals, and you can see for 3 different years how it's going up and still going up, and so it's in a very good percentage of coverage. And at the same time, there's a sustained diminishing in dropout rates in high school students. So you can see in this graph for different years how the dropout rates it's decreasing throughout the years, and right now the dropout rate in Chile is closely very similar to the OECD countries. So although it's still an issue, we think that we're doing relatively well things. But the question is, what's happening with the quality of education? We're increasing coverage, we're in a relatively good position compared to other countries, but if you see quality, well, this graph is not the last graph related to PISA, because we have had an increase in quality, But you can see that we compare with one of the most successful educational systems in the world, and you can see how the pyramid is completely the other way around. So,
Great
and
job.
it's very shocking the first time that you see it. But for example, if you see here, okay, so if you see this graph, you can see that in Chile only 6% of teenage students were the 2 superior levels. You can see it here in the left. In contrast, in Finland, 48% is achieving the 2 highest level. For example, if you have 100 children in Chile, only 1 will be at the higher level, okay? And for example, 48 will not even achieve the minimum standard. So quality is a very important issue. Here we also have TIMSS result. Chile is the country that is there with the red cross almost at the end. And so, but also the general problem is with quality is not that we're less competitive in general, but also we have a serious problem with inequality within the country. So on average we're not good, but within Chile we have a very strong inequality. In fact, according to the last PISA results, Chile was the country with the most stratified school system in the world. And we have the 13th most worst Gini coefficient country. So with all this motivation in my mind, we know the evidence. This is the most classical graph that you will ever seen in your life. This is taken by the Barber report, Michael Barber report, or McKinsey report, where you can see that the quality of a teacher makes a difference. Okay, and this is just very simple graph, but you can see longitudinal data with studies done by Jonah Rokov, Hanushek, Rifkin, and others that show that the most intra-school variable that is most important to change the pathway of achievement of students is the teacher quality. We don't know exactly what it is, the teacher quality, what's the quality of those teachers, but we know that the teacher makes a difference, okay? So, and also we know that according to this same report and others, that international experience, okay, that effective educational systems attract the most talented students, choosing the teacher between, for example, in South Korea, from the 5% of the higher in the distribution of, for example, of entering achievement to teacher profession, and you know the same evidence for Finland, Singapore, Hong Kong. In Chile, it's completely the other way around, the same as other Latin American countries. Okay, we select teachers from the lowest part of the distribution. I know that many of these problems are also in the US. Some are not so strongly, but they're very. You have very similar problems also. So I'm doing 3 things: research, entrepreneurship, and teaching. And I'm going to speak only from the first 2 today, okay? Teaching is very interesting, but I can be another session about what I'm doing with teaching. So research, I didn't want to tell you like the results of my research because it's not a scientific conference, but I wanted to let you know, because of this same motivation, okay, I said, okay, teacher is important. In Chile, data is not so good as you have here, in the sense that we don't have, for example, strong value-added data that is in all counties and for all years and for all grades. But I thought about, okay, with the data that we have, we know, for example, teacher preparation, which type of teaching profession, teaching program they went, experience, age, of course, and etc. How is the distribution of teachers in the education system according to their background characteristics? Okay, so, and then, okay, we see that it's very stratified. The best teachers are in the private schools, the worst teachers according to their academic background, okay? We don't know really if they're worse or better, but that's the data that we have, are in the poor schools. Where that starts? So I study labor mobility, okay? With longitudinal data, labor mobility, how teachers are moving and if that increases or not the inequality distribution of teachers. And we know that the mobility is not so strong in Chile, in the sense that teachers move, but when they move around the same type of schools that they started their career. So that's why now I'm studying how they choose their first job, okay, how they're choosing the first job, and how is the teacher school mapped. Is it supply or demand factors? Which pecuniary, non-pecuniary elements influence? And how past experiences influence also their first choice of career. For example, where they did their training while they were studying to be a teacher. Yeah, and we're trying to reveal the process and not only the final match. So it's very interesting about information, segmented market, etc. And what I think is most interesting, although I'm engineer economist, we're using mixed method, and really I love mixed method right now. I don't do the qualitative study, although I learned a lot here with a class with Gita when I was studying here. But it's a really good combination, and it's getting very strong results in the research. So the goal of the research, as always, is contribute to the design of more public policies, policy advice, generate new knowledge for Latin America, and contribute information that we allow to achieve more equity in the education system. So that's the first part, okay? That's research. Secondly is entrepreneurship. So we asked the question, okay, what would happen if the best talent in Chile would decide to teach? So there are two responses. These two organizations are two responses to that problem. So how do we attract the most talented to teach? So I'm co-founders of these two organizations with an amazing group of people. I'm just a piece of the organization. Right now, these two organizations have amazing CEOs that are really running these organizations. I'm part of the boards of these two organizations, thinking more about the strategic questions right now, because both organizations are running very good. And very quickly, because I know we don't have too much time, just to let you know, Enseña Chile is very easy to understand because it's Teach for America adapted to our context, okay? So I want to bring this picture just to let you know that anybody can start an entrepreneurship. This was the first meeting that we had in 2006 while I was doing my master, that we just sent an email to Wendy Cobb, can we meet with you tomorrow? And she said, yes, come to my office. And the three people that started the organization went to speak with Wendy Cobb. And starting from there, we were the first country and really the first of the countries in the world that took these programs to their countries. So this was a long time ago. And Enseña Chile, well, the mission, this is in Spanish, sorry, but the mission is very closely the same as Teach for America. We recruit the most talented students from university when they graduate. They are doing 2 years being a teacher in vulnerable communities where they experience the impact of transforming the kid, and the kid the same is transformed by the experience. And finally, after these 2 years, we have leaders that are convinced that they can really make a change in the educational system. At the same time, we have students that are more empowered. That's like a very brief, story about the mission, okay? So it's building a movement of leaders. And, okay, so we're part of this global network. Enseña Chile is part of a global network that is called Teach for All. And right now, we're in 26 countries. We were the first country in Latin America, but right now it's in Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, also in Mexico. This graph is a little bit old. And we are in a lot of countries, okay? And you can see also in Japan right now, New Zealand, etc. In fact, next week, the conference of Teach for All is taking place in Santiago, Chile. So the second social entrepreneurship that I helped to co-found is Elige Educar. And I think that Elige Educar is there's no program in the world that is doing exactly this work, although we're inspired by the TDA campaign that was done in London by Michael Barber, the Teacher Development Agency. Had a strong campaign to revalue the social profession of teachers. We were inspired by a visit that this guy did in Chile a couple of years ago, in 2008. But this program really is has been growing and adapting, and it's nothing to do, because that's not really a social entrepreneurship, it was a program of the government. So Eligio does a lot of things. I just have here, I put the mission, okay, to improve in the short term the social value of the profession, teaching profession, and to foster, to attract more talent to be a teacher. And the goals are, I'm not sure we're gonna achieve them, but we're on that. Is the teaching profession among the 5 most valued careers by 2014. And the second goal is all students entering the teaching profession among the upper 20% of the distribution. So as Finland. We have really done a very good job, but we still need 2013 and 14 to achieve the goals. So I'm just showing 2 pieces of the work that we're doing. We do a lot of communicational campaigns. Here are some spots, you can find them in YouTube, and right now we have 2 new spots that are not here. We do work in schools, like seminars for the last 2 years in high school. We do a lot of research, and we also do a lot of public policy proposals. In fact, the last one that we did last year, it's called Propuesta para una carrera docente, had a very strong impact, and the new teacher labor regulation law is almost inspired and used a lot of this content to create the law, the law that is in discussion. So that's what I'm doing. And my background, I don't have so much story as Ryan. I just put it in one slide. I don't know if it's too complete, but I'm an industrial engineering. I get to the educational field really because of my interest in to collaborate with the inequality in my country and the biggest social problems. My first job was in a local government, in a municipality. I was in charge of the school budget. And there I could do a lot of work, that's bad, in the field, okay? Voluntary and non-voluntary. So I could get inside schools and inside the system. I didn't know really too much about education. I was an engineer. So I decided to come here to the best school of education in the world and did my master. And when I was doing my master, my advisor for my master, Luis Huerta and Francisco Rivera Batiz, they pushed me to do the PhD, and I did my PhD. So I'm very happy that I took that decision. And while I was here, I did a lot of good experience. I participated in ALAS. ALAS is the Association of Latin American Students. That was really very key for me. I did an internship in the UNDP, and a lot of very interesting things. So I came back, I'm a faculty, I'm an entrepreneur, and what I value most of my work, that I work with interdisciplinary. I love design, I love sociology, I like psychology, although I really don't know much about it. I really always try to work with people from different disciplines. And I'm always trying to continue my academic development because things are changing every day. So I have to read a lot and study, and so that's what I prepared for today. Thank you.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Paulo da Silva. Paulo's from a small town in Sao Paulo State and came to TC initially to do his master's degree in TESOL, isn't that correct? And then continued in the doctoral program in international and educational development, where I had the pleasure to work with him on his dissertation, which looked at affirmative action policy in higher education in Brazil. It was a comparative study. So Paulo, welcome. We're very glad to hear from you.
I am really from this small town in upstate São Paulo called Bebedouro. You're going to find it on the map. So basically, I would like to give you some overview of what's going on in Brazil in regards to higher education. And we know that Brazil has been all over the news. I mean, it's usually in terms of like its economic development, but people usually tend to forget what hides between the lines, especially in regards to certain very specific problems that we have in the way that the Brazilian population is made up, and the access that this population has to higher education. I just came back with 23 students at NYU from Brazil, teaching this course called Race in Higher Education in Brazil. And we chose 3 very important capitals to take the students so that they could have an idea of what is going on in regards to policies in higher education. We started in Salvador, which is where I conducted my research. And then Salvador happens to be the city with the largest Afro-Brazilian population. And then we moved to São Paulo, where I'm from, and we ended the trip in Rio. The students were elated that we ended the trip in Rio, because obviously everybody knows what goes on in Rio. And what goes on in Rio stays in Rio, right? So for me to provide you guys with, let me put the timer here, because I know that this is an ambitious presentation. I don't want to. Okay. So I would like to tell you guys a little bit of the recent changes in the access to higher education in Brazil, and this ties into the expansion of higher education in the whole Latin America. So that's very interesting for us to have this kind of comparison. And the recent affirmative action policies in higher education in Brazil, it's been 10 years since Brazil implemented the first affirmative action or quota system. So right now we have concrete results, and we are able to gauge the impact that these policies have created. And then some conclusions. Obviously, I would like to analyze some aspects of this recent expansion of higher education in Brazil. For you guys to have an idea, think of the figures regarding higher education according to the latest census. We have 278 public higher education institutions. What happened to the timer here? Sorry, I'm not done yet. However, we can compare to the number of private higher education institutions. So the idea is you have to think of what does it take for a student to enter a university in Brazil. Historically, we've had this university entrance exam called vestibular, but recently the universities have accepted another one that is called ENEM, Exame do Ensino Médio, which is a high school education exam. And we have like approximately 2,000 faculdades, which are small units. They're like similar to colleges, tuition-based. We have 190 universities, 126 university centers. I don't know, so I'm not gonna have the time. So you let me know, all right? Help me out here. And 37 technological centers. But let's go back to the history of higher education in Brazil. Higher education was thought of in Brazil as something to serve the elite, the economic elite. The first universities in Brazil were created in the 50s. Thank you. But there was already an expansion in the 60s, especially amongst the private institutions. So we always have to think of this like there's this idea in Brazil, or there's a discrepancy between the public institutions that are tuition-free and are just a small portion of them, and the private institutions that have basically taken over. And there is an issue regarding the quality of these, or mostly the quality of these private institutions. And also how easy at times it is for students to enter their majors, because if you have the money to pay, so that's basically what matters. So the increase in the level of school attainment by the Brazilian population in the last decades, but inequality persists. And this inequality is based on regional differences, gender differences, income differences, and color and race. You have to think that in Brazil, and this has a lot to do with the work that I conducted here at TC, when you think of ethnicity and race, Brazil associate that to skin color, to the point that officially the government has decided to divide the population into 5 different categories: all of them based on our skin color. So you can be either white, brown. In my birth certificate, for instance, it says that I'm brown, black, yellow, which refers to the Asian population, and the indigenous population. If we take the Brazilian population among 18 and 24 years old, only 13% of the population is enrolled in higher education. And around 75% of these students attend private institutions. And 25% go to public universities. Public universities are known for their concern towards quality. So for instance, if you are a parent, you will do whatever it takes to send your son or daughter to a public university, which is tuition free. But then, for you to enter a public university, you have to pass that entrance exam. Therefore, you're going to do whatever it takes to send your kids to a private primary and secondary schools, which cost a lot in Brazil. Or at least to a preparatory course towards the university, which are also very expensive in the country. So in the context of Brazil, this means that the majority of the students attend institutions of lower quality, paying tuitions, while a small group, around 1 million students, attend higher quality institutions, which are tuition free. So I told you that in the last 10 years, the Brazilian government has implemented these policies. And affirmative action in Brazil has become synonymous with quota system. So the quota functions like this. The universities apply a percentage, on average 20%, so that students that have attended high schools in the public system of education, they can go directly to each and every major. So the quotas are implemented according to majors. For instance, medicine, 20% for medicine, 20% for dentistry, 20% for architecture, which are known for being prestige majors. And also in non-prestige majors, like languages or history and geography. So the measures addressed different policies such as the expansion of public university system, the expansion of current federal universities, fellowship programs in private institutions. So you had the quota systems in the public universities, and you had this program called ProUni, which is Programa Universidade para Todos, Program University for All, for students that are interested in going to the private colleges. So what happens is these students take not the vestibular, but the ENEM, which is the high school exam, and based on their performance and also based on their income level, they get a percentage of the tuition covered by the government. So that has created a cul-de-sac, because students now are faced with this challenge of, should I take advantage and go to and get like money to attend a private university? And I know that the quality is not as, I'm not being demanded as much as if I were to go to a public university that are known for their high quality, or should I apply for the quota system? That's very interesting because right now, when I came back from Brazil with the students at NYU, some of the university administrators at public universities were saying it's been sometimes difficult to recruit students to the quota system because at times they feel that, you know what, I'm going to go to a private school. It's going to be easy throughout the 4 years. Usually it takes 4 years for you to complete a major in Brazil. And I'll have the same diploma. Why am I going to go to a public university where I have to work my fingers to the bone when I can go to a private university? The government will pay the tuition, or most of the tuition, and I'll have the same certificate on my hands. There's been this increase, 121% increase in enrollments between 1999 and 2009. Approximately 5.5 million students entered higher education in Brazil. I told you about the differences in terms of quality and also the aspect of income, color/race inequalities and access still persists. However, there's been some advances. The expansion of enrollments in the public system between 2000 and 2008 has been 29%, while in the private institutions, 8%. So even though the students are faced with these choices, should I go to a private university or a public university, we see that in terms of the results of the quota system within the public universities, that has caused an impact, 29%. The effects of the REUNI. REUNI is Reforma Universitária, the university reform that Lula started and President Dilma has continued. It refers to the expansion of vacancies in federal universities. So the universities, the federal universities started recruiting or hiring more faculty. Therefore, this new faculty has been able to work directly with the new students, especially the quota students. Think that like these institutions for being known for being quite elitist, there was a lot of resistance on the part of the old faculty that like, we are getting these students that might lack merit, might not have what it takes to be part of the student body within our institutions. This hasn't happened much with the new faculty that REUNI has recruited. That's quite interesting as well. And the government has opened 14 new federal universities between 2003 and 2008. And the ProUni, which is that program within private institutions, was able to benefit 1.2 million fellowships, to offer 1.2 million fellowships between 2004 and 2010. So you see that a lot has happened in Brazil since the year 2000 in terms of providing access to Brazilians into higher education. The ProUni, again, ProUni is contemplated within private universities, has had some criticisms. The risk of keeping segmentation and access to higher education, strengthening, 2 more minutes, of private sector, difficulties for low-income students to access at times if they have only 50% coverage, so they have to think of covering themselves the other 50%, and the limited capacity of expansion. There are some positive aspects. It's a concrete policy to expand access to higher education. It's been well assessed by the students themselves, and concrete perspectives of better position in labor market for benefit students, especially because some of these universities, they create partnerships with companies so that there is a bridge between what the students are doing within the institution and what they're able to do afterwards. I would like to go to the national census in Brazil so you have an idea of the population makeup. So right now, the population in Brazil is in its majority black and brown. 47.7% of Brazilians are considered whites. This is through self-identification. 0.4 indigenous, 1.1 Asian. And in terms of schooling, the average of the total population is 7.3 years, whites 8.2, and blacks and browns 6.4. I would like to tell you a little bit about the quota system, which we call affirmative action in Brazil. It's very important to understand that just this year, in April, the Brazilian Supreme Court voted unanimously for the constitutionality of quotas in Brazil. Both race quotas, which are aimed for either black or brown students, and the class quotas, which contemplate students coming from the public schools. So I know that the United States, this is going to go to the Supreme Court soon. He actually they haven't reached a decision, but this is something that in Brazil has already been decided as totally constitutional. So the universities in Brazil, they can apply a quota system either towards race or class. Some of the conclusions that I would like to tell you and that I gather from the students that I talked to recently while visiting the universities is that if you are a high school student at a public school, you feel that at times higher education is not for you. So they do not recognize themselves as potential beneficiaries of the expansion policies. And also, they recognize that really, if you go to a private high school, you cannot compare with students that go to private high schools. They have a clear advantage in terms of quality. And also, it happens because they do not have access about information of these admission processes in higher education institutions. And to finish, there's a need for the higher education institutions in Brazil to design special ways of addressing the concerns and needs of students that attend public high schools. They have to provide more information regarding the admission processes, their majors, student support programs, because it's not only a fact of admitting students into these universities. What do they do in terms of providing permanence programs, which is what I studied within my doctoral degree here. And I have an expectation, which is to continue developing analysis about these mechanisms and contribute for the definition of new actions that will effectively help these policies to expand and democratize the higher education system in Brazil. Just quickly, in terms of my background, yes, I started here at TC. We started here at TC with a background in linguistics in TESOL. And I segued into international education for very personal reasons that I can tell you later. Thanks a lot.
I would like to introduce to you to Adrian Franco. Adrian, he said he's been here since 2002, that's before I arrived here. He has a doctoral degree in comparative and international education. And I think he found his job that he wanted for so many years because he's the program director of economic education at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And he supervises program about monetary policy and financial policy. So Adriana started by making a Sesame Street program to teach children about financial education. All the time he was here, he was very devoted to teaching the immigrant community in New York City about financial literacy. So he wrote a book called Mi Dinero. And he was very active in creating a non-profit organization called Qualitas of Life Foundation, that it was also directed to provide financial education in impoverished neighborhoods in New York City.
I am currently the Program Director of Economic Education at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And as an employee there always, I have to say that my views are going to be expressed today, but nothing related to the views of the Federal Reserve System. So please don't think that I'm going to talk on behalf of Chairman Bernanke or anything like that. I decided to talk today and divide my presentation in three sections: the past, the present, the future. The past about what I did here at Teachers College and New York City. The present of what I do at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and also the future, my professional goals, and a few things that I think you can actually help me with it. So let me start with my past. As Paulo, we arrived way back 2002 to this institution, and I studied a Master's in International Affairs. And you know, when I did that, I was hoping to be a diplomat. But then, you know, my life changed completely for two reasons. Number one, I started to interact with the Latin American immigrant community here in New York City. So you know, when I discovered the number of people who were coming from Mexico and other parts of Latin America in a new wave of immigration from Latin America to New York City, you know, I feel that I feel committed to do something about, you know, working with them, because I saw the needs that this community had. And the number one need was education. So I started to teach as a volunteer, GED classes and math in Spanish and computer literacy and ESL and literacy. So, you know, that had a huge impact in my life. Second thing is that while I was at CIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs, I took a class with Francisco Rivera-Batiz, professor here at TC, and that really inspired me to come to TC. He always was very influential and invited me to do a PhD here. So I enrolled to the PhD in comparative international education. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I remember in my first or second semester, I think, my class with LESLEY BARTLETT was wonderful. It was literacy and development, and it was another very important moment in my life, because I wanted to know about literacy and policies, you know, about literacy, and I discovered financial literacy in that class. You know, when LESLEY asked us, I remember the assignment, go on and had an interview with someone and talk about literacy and development, and I interviewed a Mexican immigrant, very successful Mexican immigrant who is a dentist, Dr. Gabriel Rincon. And you know, when we were talking, he started talking about interest rates and home ownership and credit score, and I was like, what is that? And you know, this is serious. I mean, I didn't know about credit score or credit history and many issues related to financial literacy. So I was very interested about that, and that's when everything started. And you know, for years I have dedicated my life to topics, and that one is financial education, the other one is economic education. Just to explain the difference between those two. Financial education is teaching people about personal finance, about how they allocate their money, their own money. So that means, you know, budgeting at home, but also having a bank account, developing their credit, doing a basic investment, preparing taxes. Those are very, very critical skills that we all must have. Economic education, on the other hand, you know, it's about teaching about the economy, teaching economics, and you know, there's a debate in the field, but I personally think that it covers from economic literacy, and that is the economic way of thinking, or seeing the world from the lens of a cost-benefit analysis, short and long term, opportunity cost, marginal benefit, and some other terms that are used by economists, all the way to, you know, fiscal policy, monetary policy, you know, how the economy is doing, what, you know, does the unemployment rate means, and you can take it all the way to people who do a PhD in economics or who are experts in certain topics. So economic education is huge, but you know, from my point of view, when I want to work on financial and economic education, I want to reach out to the communities that are underprivileged, and that usually, you know, these kind of skills or knowledge are not only, you know, in their, you know, in their houses, but sometimes in their schools. So they don't really are able to learn about these topics from anyone around. And you know, they can reach adulthood without knowing about this. And I think this is a critical issue for everyone, and it is a critical issue for the United States and the world to understand better these topics. So I did my dissertation on this, and my dissertation is, the title was Who Needs and Who Wants Financial Education? And the reason I did that is because, you know, I sampled around 600, a little bit more of 600 Mexican immigrants in New York City who had attended a financial education program, the one that Regina mentioned from Qualitas of Life. And I discovered that, you know, most of them were very interested about this topic, you know, even before they started the program. In other words, there was a selection bias problem. The people who were attending the program already had a lot of knowledge about these issues. So, you know, by the time they reach the program and they graduate from the program, yeah, they know a little bit more but they probably would have discovered the same, on their own. And then you have a lot of other people in my population, Mexican immigrants in New York City, from first generation immigrants, who will never be able to learn about these topics. So, one example, don't have a bank account. It seems for a lot of us, how is it possible that you can survive without a bank account or an account in a credit union? But there's millions of people in this country without a bank account, and they have to use other sort of financial services from the alternative market that are more costly, and sometimes there are scams as well. So basically that was my life in TC. I just want to add one more thing, that is that I had a great opportunity to work with Anand Mari, who's a professor here at TC, who invited me to work in a project called Understanding Fiscal Responsibility. And this was about teaching high school students about fiscal policy. He invited me, and he actually asked me to develop lesson plans for English language learners and workshops for their parents, for their immigrant parents on this topic. So based on that, then I was invited to work for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York on something very similar as what I was doing with Anand, but instead of fiscal policy, monetary policy. And monetary policy is a tool, that the central banks around the world uses to have an impact in the economy in the short term. And the Federal Reserve Bank of New York is part of the Federal Reserve System, that is basically the central bank of the United States. So what do I do right now? Well, as program director, I'm responsible for a portfolio of educational programs regarding economic education. The Federal Reserve System focuses both in financial education and economic education. But here in New York, we have decided to focus on economic education. And this is just by choice, to try to do a division of labor, we can call it. So other banks can focus on other topics. Some of the programs I run are, for example, the High School and College Fed Challenge. For those who are familiar with the United Nations model that students have in schools, we do the same, but with monetary policy and macroeconomics. So we have teams representing universities or high school that compete among each other and present their views on monetary policy and their prescriptions about the economy based on current conditions, and they compete in front of judges from the Federal Reserve Bank, and they advance. Actually, tomorrow we have the first round of the competition for the college level at Pace University. We're going to have 24 teams from New Jersey and New York, as well 8 more at Hamilton College in upstate New York. And from there we'll have a finals on Wednesday, and then the winner will go to the nationals in Washington, and they will meet Chairman Bernanke and other governors, and we'll have a champion. So we do that for high school and also for college. Other programs that I'm involved with is, for example, with college professors. It's very important that we keep updating professors of economics on current issues on the economy. As you know, it's a very controversial topic. And so, we invite them to the Fed, and we give them a series of presentations, and we give them a chance to interact with our researchers about it. So that's called the Federal 21st Century Symposium, and we can invite also researchers as well. It's not only for professors. So we do those kind of programs, and I'm responsible for a portfolio of those. So let me go to the future and just finish with that. One of the reasons that the bank hired me and that I actually accepted the offer is because they asked me to reach out to other communities. I mean, these programs that I mentioned are very focused on some high school in the suburbs, or Stuyvesant here, or Brooklyn Tech, but we are not reaching out to Title I schools, or schools where there are a lot of Latinos or other minorities, and we want to do that. And they want me, they took me there to do it. So I'm very happy about it, because that's my passion. I really want to reach out to communities and help in that sense. And that's the reason I said in the beginning that maybe some of you can help me, because right now we are currently looking for high schools where there is a population of minorities, but in particular Latinos, So we can invite them to these kind of programs. You know, one of the most popular programs that we oversee is the tour of the museum in the New York Fed. And that's because we have a tour of the gold vault. And we have $360 billion in gold in our basement. So it's always fun to take a look at that. So we can do that, you know, of course, at no cost. So, you know, if you work at a high school or you're interested in these kind of programs, please see me after the conference because we love to partner with you.
I would like to introduce you Milagros Nores, and she works in the National Institute for Early Education Research in the School of Education at Rutgers State University in New Jersey, and she does a lot of very interesting research about childhood attainment. So I would like her to explain to you her research better than me. But she was a postdoctoral research assistant at the Taubman Center for Public Policy at Brown, and she also taught comparative and international education there. And she also was very involved in ALAS, in the creation of ALAS, in the Association of Latin American Students Association.
The National Institute of Early Education Research is a research NGO based on the Rutgers University that focuses on doing good quality research and translating it to policy. So we also have a policy and advocacy mission, and that's part of, that also implies that I have to learn how to speak to audiences that are not academic, which is kind of hard. But I'm slowly getting better at it. And I ended up there because I decided to focus on early childhood early on. Let me tell you that whatever I know of theory goes out my window in my house, but with my kids. But my research and my mission, and now what I do, it has to do because of my passion, and I hope I'm going to translate some of the passion of this age group to at least one of you to push you into that direction, because I think it's a fundamental piece for our work in Latin America and in developing countries. So I'll start with a little bit of the background of what it looks like in early childhood in Latin America, and then at the end I'll move into what I specifically do right now. So why invest in, and I come from an economics background, so the word invest and cost effectiveness, and that comes in every part of who I am, and I can get rid of it very easily. But why do we invest in early childhood? Why do we care? I mean, many people say, that's just putting children in play, let them play. Some people are very, particularly in the US, very defensive about taking children away from the homes. But the first 5 years are the foundations for language, academic abilities, habits and social emotional development, executive functions, all of these things that will basically define where you're going and your pathways for life. And it is the rapid stage, the most rapid stage of brain development. So habits and social emotional things like that Ryan mentioned, like being able to attention, memory, visualization, responsibilities, self-regulation, very basic thing. And if you have small kids, you see how hard it is to make them self-regulate themselves. All those things are fundamental in the workforce, and they're fundamental in life skills, and it's fundamental in your tracks, and they're also fundamental in reducing crime and any precursor of crime, risky behavior, and things that Ryan also mentioned. The window does not change at 5. Some of the things that were talked about here that come up later, they do have effects. It's just that it's much more costly and it's much less effective than when you go early. Adverse experiences can have very strong impacts on the life of a child, and that could be even from the nutritional impact to being in a violent home and other risky factors. And worldwide, the number of children that are failing in just basic developmental capacities is huge. And this is the future of generations. So preschool interventions, or even I would say early childhood interventions and also preschool, and I'll use those a little bit together like the same, but they're not the same, can enhance the development and yield very high returns. So it can affect the children in so many ways for the adult life, regardless of what primary they go to, that it's worth investing. It's hard to convince politicians because it's an investment that you don't see the returns until 18 years later. So just quickly, why, even though we come from the programmatic and economic perspective, we're based on the brain development research. And it's in the first few months of your life, you see seeing and hearing, and if you have children, you see how that develops very quickly. But then you move into receptive language in the first years of life. This is years, this is months. And then in the higher cognitive functions. This is one of the areas that is most critical and turns to fail in very risky environments. So what do we see? What are the potential gains? So I tell you all these things about the investment returns. It has strong impacts on achievement test scores and special education, grade repetition, reducing those two, high school graduation, getting children out of the system, behavioral problems, delinquency, crime, all types of risky behavior, the teenage pregnancy, smoking, drug use, depression. All of these are all the kind of things that we see in good studies that are impacted long term, as I said, regardless of the primary school that they went to, regardless of the secondary school that they went to. Imagine if you could actually align all those three and have them move forward. And also, you do have a lot of decreased costs for the government. Schooling cost, repetition, dropouts, all of that are inefficiencies in the system. They're very costly. Having a child do 3 times a grade, it's very costly. Social services, children that, families that later in life require less welfare is less costly for the government. All these things are now very into the political arena. Crime costs, I mean, from the moment a person commits a crime and goes for policing to the juvenile systems or even any judicial systems, all of those are tremendous costs. And healthcare costs. Teenage pregnancy, smoking, all risky habits have a very strong healthcare cost at some point. Just so you have an idea of very basic indicator. One of the most basic indicators that we have for children in 0 to 5 is stunting, low height for age. And how strong it is in Latin America, well, you have countries like Chile, which is not, but you have countries which have 30 to even close to 60% of their children are stunted. Now, there's a very basic developmental indicator, but what stunting means is that if a children is stunted, their brain development is also back in many years. So you're basically holding all these children behind. Another thing, I know it sounds very strange if you do other types of primary and secondary education to think that we actually test children 0 to 5, but we do. And it's pretty amazing, and it's actually fun for the children in general. But it's amazing how also those tests predict their later competencies. So the TVIP is a vocabulary test that goes, it's one of those that we call very thin, long age span. So it doesn't go very deep, it just measures vocabulary, receptive and expressive, but you can use it from children the ages 2.5 all the way to adults. So you can use it for parents and for children. Now this is a TVIP a study that was done by the IDB with children age 6. And what you can see is the differences between the richest quartile and the lowest quartile in different countries. And what you can see is children in the lowest quartile are about 1.5 years to 2.5 years to almost 3.5 years behind in vocabulary, something very basic at the age of 6. So you already, at the age of 6, have almost a 3-year difference in vocabulary between the poorest and the richest in these countries. So that's why we care, and that's the famous also study that says, how many words a child receives in their household everyday life has a strong impact in later cognitive function. So we care because that is one of the best precursors of cognitive achievement later on. In part of our research, what we did, and I realized at some point that we didn't really have a notion. We had all these studies, very little that focus on pre-K, one of them that focus on nutrition and cash transfers, which were in mode for several years and still are. But we didn't have an idea of what was the impact that these good quality studies were finding. So what is the impact on children? So we defined it, put all the studies together, looked at 4 dimensions, cognitive, social, schooling, and health. And then we compared those studies that focused only on nutrition. They provided children some kind of supplementation, whether it was milk or iron or some kind of supplementation. Those were cash transfers, and those that had an educational or stimulational component. And depending on the area, of course, for the cognitive, clearly the impact is very higher. Now, what does 0.30 of a standard deviation mean? And basically, what standard deviation is in the US, the gap between the poorest and the middle, like kindergarten entry. So how far away they are from each other. 0.30 or anything above 0.30 means that you can reduce a third of that gap just by providing that program. So it's a third of the gap. It's a very big impact, not to say the least of programs that go to almost to half the gap. So the impact is humongous. But what I want to also focus is that cash transfers, good tool, very widely used, but don't always hit it on the important areas like cognition. They're good in what you expect to, health aspects. And then there's some on schooling, but none of them are long-term, so we couldn't look at cash transfers on long-term for children intervening in the 0 to 5 years old age. If you want to have an impact on cognition, and if you want to have an impact on their social emotional skills, you have to have nutritional and educational components. Cash transfer doesn't do it completely. It's that one more tool. Besides talking about early childhood, what is important is that there's so many programs out there, and the discussion in early childhood is very similar to the discussion that Ryan mentioned in primary and secondary. Quality is key. Bringing children together, and if you have, bringing children together in a small space with one teacher, 20, 2 is a handful, imagine 20. So and they are sick, and they touch each other's hands. They grab each other's pacifiers. The potential for sickness, contagiousness, disruption, keeping them not violent at a time in which their learning to regulate is very high. So bad quality can be even negative. So quality matters, and it's the fundamental thing of having this investment make sense. What is quality? Integration of health, nutrition, and education, bringing all the pieces together, ample intensity and duration, well-trained staff, starting early, and continue training your teachers and continue figuring out what's working and what's not. All the time. You can never abandon the monetary component. It's very fundamental in the 0 to 5 years old age. Time already? So these are summaries of some results to show you. Basically, just as you have an idea, increasing 25% the early childhood enrollment will result in a humongous number of investment. Just if you think of how much they would earn more in their lifetime, not to say the least of all the other aspects that have to do with crime and violence. So let me tell you what I do in just a minute. I have, besides providing support to countries and programs and being in contact with people in IDB very closely that are focused on early childhood, I was able to, in the last 3 years, have what I call it was sort of like my adopted baby, which is have the perfect study and have it funded on a good early childhood intervention in Colombia, in poorest disadvantaged communities. We are now at 3 years, we've just closing the third year of field work, and about $2 million later. And it's incredible to see how the opportunities that you provide early on to children, and I'm talking they have nothing. This is dirt on the floors, tin on your walls, and basically about it. And no water services, very little sanitary services, and all that come together. This is bringing the opportunity of providing them early childhood factors early on to reduce many aspects that come later on, including everything that has to do with risky behavior. So we are in that. This is a very high quality intervention with good components and fantastic program called IO2. We do not deliver, they deliver. It's an initiative that has brought together resources of all kinds, private and public. We come here as evaluators and to support what they're doing. Well, that's basically what are the study questions in case you're interested. I have clearly an economic perspective, but as so many of the panelists here, having an impact on the ground, even as small as it is, on what happens in quality is what I think lines this panel in many ways, and many of my friends who are here. And I provided my email early on if you have any questions, because I figured I would run out of time. I'll go back to the front page. Anyway, thank you very much.
When you first meet them, and then they open their mouths to speak, and you are blown away. This is what happened to me when I met Adriana Vilela. Adriana combines, I think, the brilliance, the commitment, and activism that we all look for in our former graduate students, and you've seen examples of this evening. Adriana started the work. She's worked as a teacher and teacher educator for many years, starting in her home country in Argentina. But she eventually reached students and other teachers, not only across the Americas, but all over the world, particularly through iEarn, which many of you may know about, the International Education and Resource Network. She's brought all this experience to her current position as Senior Education Specialist in the Office of Education and Culture at the OAS. What I'd like to do is tell you a quick story about Adriana that shows you how she inspires people, particularly teachers. Back in 1999, when she was a Master's of Education graduate student here at TC, I invited her to participate in a series of learning and technology workshops for teachers in the Upper Hudson Valley of New York, a rural area. We'd be walking into a room filled with computers and filled with very reluctant teachers with little background and a great deal of fear and reluctance with regard to using technology. So when I introduced Adriana as a teacher from Argentina who had some things to share with them, I could see a little bit of doubt in their eyes. How could this woman from another country possibly understand our situation? Adriana stood up in front of the room and, in a very soft voice, provided an example of how magic can happen with very few resources. She told the story of how in 1991, with one dial-up modem, she was able to connect students in a school in Patagonia in the farthest reaches of Argentina to teachers and a school in Siberia, and the exchange and collaboration was a wonderful experience. And of course, she was a hit with these teachers. I could have just taken the train back to New York and let her handle the whole thing by herself. She was magnificent. So she is an example of someone who helps people connect and learn. And Adriana, we're honored to have you with us today, and we thank you, and actually we celebrate all of you for what you do for the education of younger people.
Thank you very much, Regina, for having me here and celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Latin American study. Thank you all. I not only feel honored, but I really, every time I come to Teachers College, I really feel at home. And it happens all the time, and I'm so delighted to see you all. And I think that I'm going to start like the other way around, like a little bit about my background that Joanne has already told you. And yes, that's how I started. I chose to be a teacher in Argentina. And after studying, I moved to Patagonia. I was living at that time in a very small town, semi-rural area in Patagonia, in the middle of the desert. And I was a little bummed about having chosen to be a teacher, to tell you the truth at that point, because 80% of those kids were very poor, really, and from indigenous backgrounds, and they were not motivated, and I didn't feel that I could really motivate them until something magical happened. And it was what Joanne has just told you, that was that this international education in technology in 1990 reached my school, and it was like a magic moment had reached that school in the middle of nothing. And that program really allowed us to communicate with teachers all over the world. So we were very skeptical. Of course, as teachers, we never believe the Ministry of Education and what they say. And we only think that they are completely misleading us and not telling us the truth. Yeah, right. And so when they came with this proposal and they gave us our little brochures, we looked at them and said, this is not going to happen. How can a computer talk to another computer? This is never going to happen, but okay, we're going to say yes. because we have nothing to lose after all. So if we say no, they are going to probably take it to some other school, so we better say yes. And so we said yes, and I guess that was the best decision in our lives, because the magic that happened afterwards was incredible. And I think I wouldn't be here today if that had happened in 1990. So after that, I became like a fan of technology and education. I could see how technology can really make a change in the lives of teachers, students, and the equity and quality of education. And I wanted to know more. And I was so really wanting to know more that I chose the best program in international education, and I applied for it here at Teachers College, and I got accepted. And then I applied for a Fulbright, and I got it, and I came here and studied, went back to Argentina, and finished my career as a teacher, having been the assistant principal and the principal of the school, and then the supervisor, and then I worked at the Ministry of Education, and then I retired as a teacher after a whole teaching career. And then I was offered a job in Washington, D.C. at an NGO that had been born at the World Bank. It was called World Links for Development. And it was all about teaching teachers how to use technology and how to bring technology into the classroom to be more effective teachers. And I said, well, this is exactly what I want to do. Came back to the United States and worked there for 6 years. Decided that it was time to go back to my country. But then I got an offer from the Organization of American States just when I was saying goodbye, going back to Argentina. And it was in the Office of Education and Culture at the Organization of American States. And I said, well, I think I've done most everything in my life except understand how the world of big decisions works. And then I said, okay, I'm going to give that a try and try to understand how all this world of decision making and policy making works, and came to the OAS. So it's a lot that I could have, but I know that my colleagues here have already gone through many of the things that we do at the Office of Education and Culture. I guess that most of you are familiar with the Organization of American States. It's pretty much like the United Nations, but for the Americas. So it works in all areas of development and promoting horizontal cooperation. The countries are 34. There are 20 in Latin America, 14 in the Caribbean. There are 4, like in the United Nations, 4 official languages, French, Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And it promotes, what the organization tries to do is promote policy dialogue and collaboration among governments, international organizations, academia, the civil society. And in fact, the best way to describe it is to promote the dialogue and then make things happen through horizontal cooperation. So, I don't know whether, I didn't know, and I guess that I didn't understand exactly how all this world worked until I was inside the office. But all of you are aware of the summits of the Americas, where presidents meet every 4 years somewhere in the region, and they sign a declaration and they say this is our intention for the next 4 years. And then all the ministers of education meet every 2 years in these ministerial meetings, and they take the piece that belongs to their area of development, whether it is education, sustainability, or labor, or human development, social development, and then they decide, okay, we signed another declaration here, and we commit to doing such and such and such. Okay, but then they all leave, and then there's these inter-American committees of whatever, sustainable development, education, and labor, and social development, and they are the ones that draft a plan for the next 2 years after the decisions that the ministers of have made. And then there's the poor OAS, they are understaffed with very few people who have to make all those things happen with little money but lots of enthusiasm. Okay? So I'm going to switch to education now, and as you know, the pursuit of education for all and the goals for 2015 are basically those 6 goals there. The ones that are in green are the ones that the OAS is actively involved with because of the mandates and declarations of the Ministries of Education. So basically there are 4 themes in which the OAS is very actively involved. One is education indicators, and we have already seen the TEAMS results and the PISA results and the CERSA results, and really, I mean, monitoring the way to education for all. It's true, and it's been mentioned here, that the region has really done a lot about coverage and equity, but not so much in other areas. Then there's early childhood care and education. There was a meeting of ministers of education, especially to foster that hemispheric commitment in early childhood and education. There's education for democratic citizenship, and Ryan referred already to values and democratic citizenship, and people and young people being, it's necessary that they really get involved in citizenship. And then the last one is teacher education and professionalization. Now, I think that you have all heard already through several of the people here, what is the biggest challenge in the LAC region in education today? What do you think? Right, it is quality, and everybody mentioned that. And it's also true that quality education cannot be achieved without adequate numbers of properly trained, qualified teachers. That is one thing. It's not all of it, of course. There are many other factors, but it is the one thing that is school can pursue. The 7th meeting of Ministers of Education in 2012 was held in Suriname, and the declaration of Paramaribo states all the commitments towards getting and helping teachers be more effective. The name of that meeting was Transforming the Role of the Teacher in Response to 21st Century Challenges. And I was so pleased to see 34 ministers of education talking about teachers for the first time in my whole career as a teacher, in fact. I was in bliss, I'm telling you, I was in total bliss, because as a teacher I never felt that any Ministry of Education cared about us teachers. And probably some time ago it was like that. But I guess that today the international debate is really in teachers. So, okay. This is the initiative that the OAS has for teachers. It's called Inter-American Teacher Education Network. It is a virtual network of teachers. The audience is policymakers on one side and teachers of all levels on the other side. And it's the way to have horizontal cooperation at different levels in an inexpensive way, because technology today really allows for all kinds of communications and cooperation in a very inexpensive way. You don't have to travel anymore, you don't have to be at the conferences so much, but at least this is a way where we can get to many places. I'm not going to talk about the history. It's an idea that brewed since 2004, this Inter-American Teacher Education Network. It was officially launched in 2010, but that doesn't I think that we have very little time right now. So I'm going to tell you just like how does that cooperation takes place through information exchange, capacity building, and technical assistance. The components of this network is one informational website. I brought some brochures, so if you want to take afterwards. The virtual community, which is an interactive platform for all those interested people in teacher the profession work, social media. The heart of it is webinars that we broadcast from the OAS headquarters in Washington, and we only started like 8 months ago, and they have become really like the heart of the whole thing. We bring experts from all over Latin America and the Caribbean, and we do 2 to 4 webinars every month, and they in different topics of the teacher profession. And then there are also online courses in different topics. One is technology and education, and there is also peace education and conflict management, several others. So basically, that's it. This is the website in English, and that's the informational website, and this is the interactive platform for teachers and policymakers to be able to go and share. Of course, we do not do this by ourselves. It would be impossible. So the financial contributors have been mainly the government of Canada and the government of the United States, and then IERN USA and Fundación Evolución in Argentina for the online courses. We had a fund also given by the OAS. The government of Trinidad and Tobago was the main sponsor for this network. And we have many alliances and partnerships for other initiatives. For example, with the University of Pennsylvania, we have a program, really, that now we learned that she's going to be our next expert. She learned today in the next webinar. And the World Bank and PREAL, well, many organizations, and I hope that next time I can put Teachers College logo there, okay? Somehow. Because we've been talking about doing something, but we haven't yet. So I would very much like to be able to do really some kind of partnership.
Thank you again for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.